Hey, Seth, welcome to the show. Thanks for being with us.
All right, Sean, been looking forward to this for a while, so why don't we get
Good.
started? Obviously, we're 15 days out.
Yeah, let's geek out a little because I was telling the audience, like, I love the fact. I mean, people all the time look at betting markets. Look at this. I've told people I get that those are all cute, but at the end of the day, data is what matters, and what you do in your Substack and in these analyses is data focused, right? And that's where I think we need to be. I want to just start with some of the states that you've done some analysis in. And obviously the big one off the bat is Arizona, the state that I think President Trump has the greatest likelihood of the 7 battleground states of putting back into his column. Tell me what we should look at in terms of Arizona, because I've got this. I'm going to put this chart up on the screen for the audience to see that you did this forecast model. It's got every county, Apache, Cochise, et cetera, all the way down with what the registration was in 2020 and what it is now. What should we take away from that chart?
Well, Sean, so your audience understands this. We have the media polling, which of course is flawed, and even if pollsters are honest, they're going to have a certain margin of error. But the most predictive analysis that shows the trajectory of an upcoming election is and always has been voter registration by party. 31 states register voters by party, and out of you said 7 battleground states, I throw New Hampshire in for an eighth.
I was gonna. We're gonna get to that because I saw what you've been doing on New Hampshire, so I'll get to there. But
Right. So some of those register by party and others don't. Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and New Hampshire do register voters by party. So when you pull that Arizona slide up on the 15 counties, you'll notice that all 15 have shifted Republican. So they're either more Republican in its registration or less Democrat. What that means is the momentum. It's measuring the momentum of a party, and it's always geared towards who that party's figurehead is. In the case of the GOP, obviously, we're talking about Donald Trump. And in the case of the Democrats for the last 4 years, mostly Joe Biden, but Biden Harris, as of course she can't distance from him. On that graphic, you'll notice all 15 counties in Arizona have a rightward shift since 2020, including Maricopa County, which is important because Maricopa County is more than 60% of the vote. And when you put it together with.
So in Maricopa, you have that Republicans had a 3.9% advantage in 2020, if I'm reading this right, and now they've got a 6.6. Is that how you should read that?
Yeah, it's actually, as they're finishing up their registration statistics right now, Maricopa County is now R plus 6.9. It's a gap of 176,000 and counting registrations between Democrats and Republicans. So President Trump, when he came on the scenes in 2016, Maricopa County began voting to the left of its Republican voter registration index. That's your flux of the independent voter, especially LDS voters, which President Trump now has a positive approval rating with for the first time in his political life. So if Trump ran the same margin left of registrations this year that he did in 2020, even with all the issues with that election, he would still carry Maricopa County by more than 30,000 votes, according to these statistics. Putting them out for all 15 counties, you're looking at a potential bloodbath, especially if they're not fully capturing a Latino working class coalition shift in favor of President Trump. My registration analysis easily comes out to Trump plus at least 5 points in Arizona, which may be big enough to pull the Senate race too.
Wow. So let me just. I think this is fascinating here. So in Arizona, you think that Trump could win by 5 points there. That's a slam dunk.
Well, that's a conservative estimate just based on the registration trend. In the
Okay,
Democrat.
but what if, Seth? Let me ask you this. I think what I want to understand is, let's say I was a Democrat, but I leave the Democratic Party and become an independent, or vice versa. How does this model take into consideration? It's not that, because obviously people don't have to register by party.
Correct. And that's been the biggest kickback against the type of work that I do, is that just because you're registered as X doesn't mean you have to vote X. And when we get to New Hampshire, you'll see the difference here. But when you stack these results going back all the way into the 90s, as far back as the data can be found, the next election almost always follows in the direction of the voter registration trend. The only times you'll ever see it bucked is if the change is very narrow in an urban area, like this has happened in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania a few times, where the remaining independents, because it's urban, are more left-leaning. But typically this index captures the sentiment of the non-affiliated voter, and therefore that is why the tide is blowing and is rolling in that direction.
So why doesn't a poll pick this up? I mean, I get the unscientific, I get the margin of error, but wouldn't you see a trend more in like a place like Arizona? If you think he could win by 5, shouldn't he maybe be up by 2, 3 in the polls?
And I think that's where his average sits. I think his average in the New York Times is 2. And I've seen some of their recent polls up towards 5 or 6. But one of the bigger issues with this, with the sampling, of course, Harris is now being seen as having benefited from a major response bias when she came on the scenes with very little notice in late July. But in the case of a state like Wisconsin, it's well known that it's hard to reach voters that are out in the hinterlands of Wisconsin, which have trended heavily from being Obama backing counties in '08, some of them in 12, to being heavy Trump counties by 50 or more points. And those folks are hard to read. And then when you don't get an accurate read on what their turnout is going to be, you're going to get a lot of variance. And that's why Wisconsin was 6 points off in 2020. So polling, even some of the good pollsters will tell you they think that polling is potentially on the outs. And I would say that given the numbers that I can find that are very predictable, that it would be wiser if you're in Arizona to figure out where Trump is in Pima County in Tucson. And if you get a good read on the Hispanic vote there, there's a pretty good chance with these more predictable counties that he's going to be accelerating his margins. And I've got a number for Trump near 200,000 votes in victory based on the registration advantages alone.
So I just want to, I mean, if I do this road to 270 every Wednesday, where I go through the 270 states, and I know you've done that as well, but I do it every Wednesday on the show. When I get to doing it this Wednesday, there's no, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I just want to make sure that, like, if I put Arizona solidly in the Trump column as a red state that will deliver its 11 electoral votes for Donald Trump, you would say you what?
I would say that you're right that Arizona of the top 8 is maybe the most solid for Trump. I think North Carolina is probably more solid fundamentally than Arizona is.
That's interesting.
Arizona does have some interesting independent behavior. It's also got a major metro area. Remember, Pima County and Maricopa County make up almost 7 out of 9 votes in the state. So that means that 13 counties are only giving you 2 out of 9 votes, and they can easily be overwhelmed if the margins get out of hand in Phoenix.
But there's no scenario in Arizona where you're like, hey, look, I mean, because I'm looking at every one of these counties that you've done on this spreadsheet. And, you know, I mean, again, every one of them moves to the right. There's no scenario where you could say, gosh, if she just runs up the score in X county, this could overwhelm it, right?
Right. So she's going to have to. One of the biggest issues she has is Pima County. Pima County gave Biden a margin over 90,000 votes. And that's Metro Tucson, and it's heavily Hispanic, which personally, outside of the registration trends, I think Trump is going to have a minor Miami move in places like Pima County, where you're going to get a big shift of registered Ds that haven't registered R that are going to back Trump. But even without that, she's due to lose about 18,000 in margin from Biden just based on the changes in registration alone, which is almost double the statewide margin. So she would have to get a Biden margin in Pima County, and she would need to win Maricopa County by as much as Biden had that county certified for him at, which was about 45,000 votes, and then hope for low Trump turnout in the outlying 13 counties just to have a chance to tilt the state. I ran a pessimistic forecast of Arizona, which is separate from my registration model, and it still had Trump by 1.3% based on turnout.
That's what I wanted to hear. That made me feel a lot better. You mentioned North Carolina. Let's move to North Carolina. Tell me what I need to know about North Carolina, because I'll be honest with you, I keep worrying. They had a really good first day of early vote, but the post storm concerns are what get me a little freaked out about how the state might go. Tell me where the state stands and what, if anything, you think we should be worried about when it comes to the impact the storm had.
Well, the first thing you ought to know about North Carolina is that it votes with Florida. And it's voted with Florida since the 1960s. So if Florida's been Republican, North Carolina has been Republican too. That's a good sign because everybody and their mother knows.
And the inverse as well. If Florida voted Democrat, then.
Well, in 2012, Florida backed Obama narrowly, and Mitt Romney won the state. So North Carolina, until recently, has been a state that's voted to the right of Florida. I don't think that will be the case this year. But everyone knows that Florida is going to give Trump a massive margin. And those Sunbelt states are typically moving in the same direction. And with North Carolina, what people would need to know about the voter registration there is it's got a traditional ancestral Democrat registration advantage. And that's been that way since forever. In fact, Florida only recently flipped from a Democrat advantage to a GOP advantage in 2021. So North
Explain
Carolina.
What you mean by ancestral, though. What does that mean?
Well,
because my dad voted Democrat?
In the case of the South, you're talking about the old solid South. The old solid South came up after the Civil War, where the South continued to vote Democrat for until about the 1970s when it began to break apart. Some of the states like North Carolina started poking through in the 50s or 60s to vote for federal Republican candidates, but they still maintained a Democrat edge in state politics, and they still have strength for governor's races, which is why you see the disparity today. But North Carolina has gone from D+9 when Trump won it in 2016 to D+5 when Trump still won it, despite all the mail-in balloting going on. And now it's D+1.5. 96 out of 100 counties in North Carolina have a Republican Party shift present since 2020, including Mecklenburg County, which is home to Charlotte and the metro area.
So what do you think? Should I be concerned about the impact that storm had on Western North Carolina?
I think that due diligence requires you to understanding that there are 29 counties west of the disaster line. And in those counties, my pessimistic analysis suggests that Trump should pick up about 50 to 70,000 net new margin over them. So that would actually swamp out any new margin gains from Charlotte or Wake County or Mecklenburg or Wake counties the Democrats might make. But from my understanding from locals there, there are only 4 counties in the West that are really badly damaged to the point of having to make extra plans to get the vote out. And one of them is Buncombe County. So I think that based on where the turnout's coming from, a lot of those counties are through the roof with turnout. And in Georgia, some of the counties in the East are also through the roof. I believe that motivation is going to get the vote out to where the margins do come through. But
so again, when I look at North Carolina on Wednesday, as I do this road to 270, I kept it light red because I was concerned about some of the turnout efforts and the ability, frankly, to turn out, meaning that people still they couldn't get to maybe their voting place if it existed in Western North Carolina. Should I keep it light red or should I go more of a solid red?
I think that it's safe for Trump at least 2 points. The registration trend out analysis looks like 6.3% on my end. I think that you're likely to find a margin between 4 and 7 points in North Carolina.
No way, which would outdo the last 2 cycles by a significant amount.
Correct. Now, it was 3.7% in 2016. So what you need to understand about the turnout for early voting, it's more Republican in the mail ballot request than it's been ever. And then on day one of in-person early vote last week, 4 years ago, day one in-person early vote was Democrats plus 28% turnout. Day one this time was only Democrat plus 2, and day 2 was R plus 2.
See, that is huge, right? And this is where the Dems mistake. They think all the mail-in vote is huge. I think our side has done a much better job of getting people to engage, and that statistic bears it out.
They don't have the volume coming from the urban core areas that they need. So the Obama coalition, what would Harris really need? We all know that the Democrats don't have the white working class they had when Obama came up in 2008. And he also had a record minority turnout with a record share of the vote. And where the votes are not coming from is core Charlotte, core Raleigh, and core Atlanta so far. The turnout is not there, and it's not keeping up with the Trump areas of the states.
But it could, right? So we should we be a little cautious of this? Does it just mean that the Dems haven't turned those folks out and they still could?
Well, if we think that they're going to turn into the in-person on Election Day party, then they could. Right now in Florida, first day of in-person early voting, it's an absolute bloodbath. We've got Alachua County, home of the University of Florida, Miami-Dade County are R+ right now on in-person early turnout.
So in North Carolina, one of the things the Dems will tell you is, post-COVID, a lot of people moved to North Carolina because they wanted to live in a state like that and they wanted to get out of these blue states. Is there any data to suggest that happened, that these people left New York and Illinois or whatever and moved to North Carolina and are now part of a new Democratic coalition?
Yes, there are 4 counties out of 100 in North Carolina that are less Republican or more Democrat than they were in 2020. So in certain areas like Raleigh-Durham, that could be the case. But in most of the rest of the state, especially on the Atlantic coast, heavily Republican counties, and they've been Republican for a long time, it's the opposite. It's the same crew. It's the same crew that's moving down to Florida and turning that from D+1 to R+8 in one cycle.
Yeah, there's a term I heard the other day. I'm sure I can't remember it now. It's called like halfbacks, I think is what they called them. Like they're people who moved down to Florida, maybe thought it was too hot, and then moved to North Carolina or South Carolina or Georgia, meaning they went halfway back to, Minnesota or Wisconsin or whatever. Anyway, I just thought it was an interesting term that I'd never heard. Let me move to the must-win Pennsylvania registration numbers, because 19 electoral votes at stake there. This is the map that really put you on my radar. When I saw your Substack column that you put out that had this first chart on there, I went, wow. And I've played this. If you're a loyal watcher of the show, you've seen Seth's column, this chart from his column up on the thing. Walk me through the big takeaway from this Pennsylvania forecast model that I'm looking up now with 2020 and 2024 registration numbers?
That model continues to get better with time, like a fine wine. In fact, Pennsylvania Secretary of State just released the latest registration data, which I'll update and, of course, get it to you. Last week was the last full week of registration. I believe it ends tonight at midnight, so it's going to get one more update. But the last update, which is not even given to you on that sheet, was the Republicans cut off another 15,000 net registrations from the Democrats. So their lead is under 300,000 for registration, and it's under 3.5%. So
all right, walk me through where it was, though. Let's go 2016, 2020 now.
63 out of 67 counties since 2020 have a Republican Party tailwind. So that means that in the only 4 that are out there, you have Cumberland County, which is a Republican county in the center of the state. It's just one of those Republican demographics that's going a little bit against Trump, but it's almost dead even. It's not much of a shift. And then we have the 3 collar counties of core Philadelphia. I'm talking about Chester, Delaware, and Montgomery. Delaware has a significant shift to the left of about 3 points. The other 2 are very little. In fact, all 3 have a Republican shift for the last 4 weeks. So even the momentum for Trump is captured in all of these counties. So Pennsylvania is a massive Trump type state. It was D plus 10.5 when Trump won it in 2016. It was D plus 7.5 when Trump only lost the state by 80,000 to Scranton Joe, an Irish Catholic from northeastern Pennsylvania. And of course, we have all the 2020 issues that were present. And then in 2024, it's D plus 3.4%. So Trump ran 605,000 votes to the right of their Democrat registration advantage of 686K in the last election. And now it's under 300,000. So if Trump only runs half as far to the right as he did this time, he'll flip Pennsylvania. The numbers for Pennsylvania look like Ohio 2016.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.